There were so many things near the end of my early days with Atari that I wished, like everything we felt was underappreciated. Like I bought a Lynx and I was trying to find people to play the Lynx with me, and everyone else had a Game Boy, and I was like, you guys, Todd's Slime World, let's do this, let's play Warbirds, come on.
And the Lynx was totally Sam's baby. He loved the notion of the hardware, and Sam, man, he loved the Lynx into the ground, right? Against all odds, he wanted to make it successful. We did the original one that was sort of the original design, and then he was like, no, we got to double down on it and do it and make it better.
Being in the Bay Area, you see these ads, come test video games. So I think I tried out at a few places. Electronic Arts comes to mind. Didn't get the job there, but was lucky enough to kind of get the QA job at Atari. Back in the day, I think it was a lot more fun. People playing 4 Lynx games and then having them all go out of sync and then having to track that down. Like, probably at the 1,000th time that happens, it does get a little old. But I think back in the day, you actually got a lot more input into the games. So a lot of the last Lynx games like Lemmings and some of the early Jaguar games like Cybermorph, the QA department actually got a lot of input into those games from a design perspective. You know what? I think the Lynx was great hardware. I like the fact that it was color. And I think the fact that you could have this like 4-way local multiplayer was great.
20 some years later, here I am buying a Lynx with a RGB output because people are still modding them, and selling them on eBay and stuff, right? I remember sitting in the room with Jack, and Jack saying to all of us, let's go back to our roots. Let's do at least one more game system.
The controller is quirky. The industrial design of both the CD and the main unit are quirky. And the fact that, like, I guess somebody used the tooling on the main unit to make some kind of dental device. Like, it just has like this weird, quirky history that I think is also inviting.
One of the most interesting things about the architecture of Jaguar was this notion of having the Motorola 68000, which basically was responsible for booting and housekeeping, and then the Tom and Jerry chips.
I mean, I think at the time, 68000 was still a strong processor, but obviously it was in the Genesis and other things, so you weren't really getting that true 64-bit experience. But I think there's games out there that took advantage.
There's so many features in Jaguar that for a developer like Jeff Minter that did Tempest 2000 for Jaguar was like, wow, give me this.
I would say other than Cybermorph, it did not necessarily feel like that quantum leap that we were promised. It wasn't the flying cars, as they say, that we would have in the future, but you could see the potential, and that's what was really cool. You could see the parts of Cybermorph, you're like, oh, fully 3D world compared to something like maybe a Star Fox, which was on rails.
My perspective is the rule of thirds, where if you want to wind up with one really, really great game, you need to lay down 9 bets. because out of those 9, 1/3 probably will ship. And out of those 3 games, 1 is going to be a hit, the other will be, and the other probably might be a dinger. Yeah. You know, there just wasn't enough momentum behind the Jaguar at that time to be able to do that, when Sega and Nintendo were basically already on their 3.5 generation of consoles, you know, at those times.
I mean, if Aliens vs. Predator came out as a launch title, maybe the history of the Atari Jaguar might have been slightly different. I think there are a lot more Jaguar fans today than there were when the system actually came out, and it's cool to see people enjoying the system some 20-odd years later. I believe everybody appreciated the innovative aspect, but on the other hand, the software was late, some of it was a little janky, but I think just saying, you know, time heals all wounds, to go onto the Jaguar forums now and look at the love for the system, honestly, like somebody that worked on it, I can't say that I completely understand it, but I totally appreciate it. I'm like, where were you guys like 20 or 30 years ago? You know, like you would have made my life like a heck of a lot better.
I feel the best Atari games ever made have been made in the last 5 years. Like, I think the homebrew scene is incredible. People have figured out, and it's unfair to compare because the original people had like 5 weeks to make, you know, ET or whatever. And now people can take, it's like a hobby, you can take as long as you want, and you have access to like special chips and stuff. But still, they're still working, eventually making carts that you plug into your original Atari 2600 and they run, and they're super fun.
We saw it evolving, and there was a lot of nostalgia involved for that to happen. We loved this particular game system, and it's a great intellectual challenge.
In 2009, I was given a talk in Philadelphia just talking about the game business and my experience there. And after the talk, somebody came up to me and they said, hey, I just saw this cool book just came out called Racing the Beam. And it's about programming the 2600. And since you mentioned that you worked on the 800, I thought you might be interested in this book. And I'm like, it does sound really interesting.
Back in the old days when I had my Atari 800, I did learn 6502 assembly language, and so I've been messing around and making some of my own Atari games. I'm not ready to make Psychonauts on the Atari yet, but someday I'm going to make Psychonauts on the Atari 2600. Not announcing that yet, but don't tell anyone. But
what is the point of going back to work on one of these old machines anyway? I mean, to me, the point is I want to know what it was like to be, you know, Todd Fryer, you know, and who was, you know, told he has 3 months to write Pac-Man on this terrible machine. And am I a man enough, you know, programmer to be able to do that?
You know, Pac-Man was actually technically quite solid.
it's fun to program for the 2600 because it's unique. It's, you know, 128 bytes. Not K, but like bytes of memory. Like, it's so limited that it helps you edit, you know, and so you can't do everything. You can't imagine an experience and then implement it on the Atari. You have to go the other way around. Like, how many blocks can I move on the screen? Like, how can I turn that into a fun game?
It was very, very hard to squeeze a 128 level game with a, you know, title screen and a boss encounter and all that into 4K of ROM, because that's one of the limitations on the 2600. If you're going to live within the original constraints. And so I learned a ton about the 2600 along the way. I had a lot of fun. It was a lot of hard work, and I'm proud of the way it turned out.
I think of the homebrew as the hobbyist who wants to see if he can do it, and he makes a game and he makes a few for friends. That has evolved into some actual publishers making Atari 2600 games that are out there.
But there was a guy came on there the other day, and he's like, I just want to say this is the most supportive technical community I have ever been part of. So it is an amazing community and very welcoming to new people. So I would encourage people to do that.
There was no console war in the beginning. There was, you know, in the beginning there was only Atari, and the children looked upon it and saw that it was good and bought Atari and then asked for Atari games for every Christmas and birthday. The Easter eggs, finding the Easter eggs in Howard's game and Warren's game, you know, those were huge moments for me in my childhood and my favorite early gaming experiences, especially finding that room in Adventure. You know, that path that everybody, whoever found the Easter egg, follows those clues, and then discovers this, you know, this secret room, this message hidden by the creator of the game, who I didn't even know who he was. And here's his name, and a whole secret room, you know, that most kids who play this game never found. I found this secret place left by the creator, you know, with a message for me. It was profound, and the first time that it ever happened in a video game. And so years later, when I was, you know, I think had the initial idea for Ready Player One, was what if Willy Wonka had been a video game designer? And what if he held his golden ticket contest inside a video game? And that immediately made me think of the secret room at Adventure and how that could be, you know, how he finds his worthy successor, you know, instead of a tour through the factory where he slowly kills off all the children. It could be an Easter egg hunt inside this, you know, sprawling video game, and it could be hidden the way that those Easter eggs were hidden in the Atari games. And so that, there's no way I ever would have written Ready Player One if I hadn't grown up with an Atari and playing those games and finding those Easter eggs.
As I was reading through it, there was just so much familiarity in there. It felt like, as I was reading it, that the person who had written it, that like I grew up with them. Because some of the names that were in there, some of the locations, some of the references were things that I thought only I knew. And nobody else in the world would understand or appreciate any of it. My literal opening, my email to him, before anything blew up on Ready Player One, my literal opening was just like, we have to know each other because there's things in this book that like only I know. Like, where did we meet before? And that was the beginning of our full communication, which led to the stacks.
He read Ready Player One and it spoke to him, and he sent me an email that said, hey, I make video games for a living and your book really spoke to me, and if you ever want to make a video game, let me know. And I was right in the middle of trying to figure out if I could somehow do a promotional contest for the paperback that mirrored the contest in the novel. I wanted to do some sort of contest with 3 video game challenges and a grand prize at the end of it. And because Mike made that offer, I took him up on it. I'm like, oh, well, we could make an Atari game that you have to beat as the first challenge, and it could be the game that Wade makes in the novel.
Part of what made the book feel like it was written for me is because of the context around the 2600 rite of passage in there. Because for programmers in the game industry, 2600 is this really difficult platform to develop games for. To get anything to even appear on screen, to get anything to even work correctly, you have to just break your brain and rid it of everything that you understand about how games are developed today and go back to this kind of like primitive, primordial way of coding. And so for a lot of programmers, it is a rite of passage. If you can do that, you can do anything.
Wade makes his own game, and it's the Stacks. It's based on his life in the Stacks, and he describes it as a Pitfall ripoff that has you climbing around the stacked trailers, looking for food voucher power-ups and trying to avoid like pedophiles. And it's like a 1-paragraph description of this game. But I sent it to Mike, and he's like, "Oh, hell yeah!"
And so I had dabbled over the years with trying to understand 2600 programming. I'd made a couple small games, a couple hacks. So when this kind of came around, it was the perfect excuse to just finally deliver something that was all original and build something from the ground up. Once it started to work, it was completely satisfying. I felt like I had mastered what the greatest engineers in the world have mastered before me, and that I finally had an understanding of it. And to get there, of course, I had to enlist some help. And so that help came in the form of Kevin Wilson, our CTO at Digital Eclipse. I didn't mention this before, but we only had a few weeks to pull this off. So we were not only trying to learn 2600, but we're also given the time frame that basically ET had to try to get this game out the door. So we were reliving the worst of Atari's development history all over again, and I savored every second of it.
in our original contest version, all the items are hidden in the same place, which is great because we had people making maps. For like the first time since they were kids, they were making maps of the stacks to remember. So if they died, they could go back and find where the items were. But then they added randomization, and now it might be one of the best Atari games ever made. Not to brag, but the stacks is pretty deep and pretty replayable for an Atari game. That's why I think Atari is always going to hold a special place in the hearts of people like me, just because it was, it was the first, and it was, so needed. We were so bored in the late 70s. We needed video games at home so badly. The fact that other better consoles came later is because they saw the giant cultural and economic behemoth that Atari immediately became. Atari created the video game industry, the home video game industry, and everybody that's come since then is, kind of building on what Atari created.
When we started, video games were almost considered to be a bastardization of this wonderful technology. Why are you using it for fun when you could be creating missiles? I think we stood for innovation, and also we were the genesis story of the video game, which is kind of important. So I think you always have a hallowed position when you're the first.
Yeah.
When we chose the Fuji logo, I wanted to be an upward swoosh. And I think that if you look at the Atari logo, it's a collective, it's aspirational, just in the nature of the graphic. Also, Atari, I lifted it from the Game of Go. So it's a game word. But I hadn't realized that it also means bullseye.
Right.
It also means jackpot. So, it's got this affirmative. In fact, I was talking to a Japanese guy one time, and he says, very good name, Atari. Perhaps a bit boastful for Japanese.
You're like, spot on for Americans.
Spot on for Americans.
Yeah.
One of the ethos of Atari was work hard, play hard. So we always had games, not just Atari games, but foosball and pool tables in the snack rooms and what have you. What that said was, we don't care when you come to work. If you come to work, get your job done, we're okay. We're all adults here. And we don't care how you come to work. You want to wear tennis shorts and blue jeans? Do you want to wear a tuxedo? We don't care. We had one guy that liked to wear ball gowns, but that's another story. I could tell some stories, though, about how I used to mess with the people who copied me.
Oh, please. All right. Let's hear that.
Okay. Atari started by building games that you could do in a garage shop. So anybody that had a garage shop could copy us. And so of the 150,000 estimated Pong-type games that were created, Atari only shipped 30,000 of them. So we got less than a fifth of our market.
Right.
And so as we innovated, people would start copying us. And I thought, I'm going to get them. So I had our semiconductor suppliers. We were kind of a big deal in the semiconductor industry because they were selling a lot to the military and that sort of thing, but they'd sell 20 or 100 chips. We were buying thousands.
Right.
And so I had them mismark the chips. So that we had...
That you guys were using.
That we were using.
So if somebody tried to reverse engineer it.
So
wow.
if they reversed engineer and just bought off the shelf those same numbers, they'd populate the board and they wouldn't work.
Did you ever hear of anybody doing that?
Oh yeah. We in fact,
brilliant.
We had one company that basically declared bankruptcy because they had a whole floor full of machines that they worked because they were hurrying to do it.
Oh, man.
And we had the temerity to have a champagne party on their front lawn. We celebrated their demise and invited them, of course.
Did they show up?
No.
What do you think Atari's role is, not just in video games, but in popular culture today?
Well, I think that Atari has an unassailable role as being the Genesis story. I believe that it is understood by a lot that it succeeded because of creativity. 30 of those years, it was kind of in hands that were not kind to it. Don't say anything bad. So I think that pieces of the brand were damaged. Not irrevocably, but it could have been husbanded better. And so right now, I think that it would be good to take the innovation legacy and push it forward into the future.